You are buying honey at the grocery store, and your tomatoes barely set fruit, and your squash flowers fall off before they produce anything, and you are spending money on pollination services or hand-pollinating with a paintbrush like some kind of desperate gardener. And the reason this is happening is because your garden has no bees. And the reason your garden has no bees is because your garden has no flowers. And without flowers, there is no nectar. And without nectar, there are no bees. And without bees, there is no pollination. And without pollination, your garden produces maybe 30% of what it could produce. And this is the problem with modern vegetable gardens. They are designed to grow vegetables and nothing else. No flowers, no herbs, no diversity, just rows of tomatoes and peppers and squash. And bees fly right over these gardens because there is nothing for them. And so you get poor pollination and low yields. And you end up buying honey at the store when you could be harvesting 50 pounds of honey a year from your own backyard, while simultaneously tripling the yield of every single vegetable that requires pollination. Now here is what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you 15 flowers that you must plant in and around your vegetable garden to attract bees all season long, from early spring until late fall. And these are not ornamental flowers that just sit there looking pretty. These are working flowers, flowers that produce massive amounts of nectar and pollen, flowers that bees cannot resist, flowers that will turn your garden into a pollinator magnet. And when you plant these 15 flowers in the right sequence so that something is always blooming, you create what John Seymour calls a closed-loop system, a system where the bees pollinate your vegetables, and in return, you provide them with nectar and pollen. And the result is that your vegetable yields triple, your squash actually produces, your tomatoes set fruit on every truss, your cucumbers grow straight and full, and on top of all that, you harvest 50 pounds of honey every single year without ever buying another jar at the grocery store. And this is not some modern permaculture theory. This is how every single country garden worked for thousands of years. Seymour writes that nearly every cottager kept bees, not as a hobby, but as an essential part of the food-producing system, because bees and gardens are inseparable. You cannot have a productive garden without bees, and you cannot keep bees without flowers. And this is the system I'm going to teach you. This is Category 1, early spring flowers. The first flower you must plant is crocus, and the reason crocus is so important is because it blooms in February and March when almost nothing else is blooming, and bees are desperate for food after winter, and crocus provides both nectar and pollen at a time when bees are starving. And if you plant crocus bulbs in the fall, they will naturalize and spread and come back every single year, and bees will cover them the moment they open. And this early nectar gives the bee colony the energy boost it needs to build up population for the main nectar flow in summer. And without early spring flowers like crocus, your local bee population stays weak and your garden suffers. The second flower you must plant is snowdrop, and snowdrop blooms even earlier than crocus, sometimes in January depending on your climate. And it is one of the very first sources of pollen available to bees. And bees need pollen to feed their larvae, and without pollen, the colony cannot grow. And snowdrop provides this critical early pollen. And like crocus, it is a bulb that you plant once and it comes back forever. And it spreads slowly over the years until you have drifts of white flowers covering the ground in late winter. And bees will work these flowers even in cold weather, even when the temperature is barely above freezing, because they are that desperate for food. The third flower you must plant is fruit tree blossoms. And I know this is not technically a flower you plant separately, but if you have any fruit trees in your garden, apples, pears, cherries, plums, these trees produce massive amounts of nectar and pollen in April and May. And bees absolutely swarm fruit tree blossoms. And this is one of the main nectar flows of the year. And if you do not have fruit trees, you should plant at least one or two because they serve a dual purpose. They feed the bees in spring and they give you fruit in summer and fall. And the pollination from the bees ensures that your fruit trees actually set fruit instead of just blooming and dropping all the flowers. And Seymour writes that fruit trees were always part of the country garden because they provided food for both humans and bees. And this is why gardens with flowers outperform gardens without flowers every single year. The fourth flower you must plant is chives, and chives are a perennial herb that produces purple pom-pom flowers in May and June. And bees absolutely love chive flowers. They cover them completely. And the great thing about chives is that you can harvest the leaves for cooking and then let the plant flower for the bees. And chives spread slowly and come back every year, and they require almost no maintenance, and they grow in sun or partial shade. And they are one of the easiest pollinator plants you can grow. And if you let some of your onions and garlic bolt and flower, bees love those flowers too. And this is an example of how you can integrate pollinator flowers directly into your vegetable garden without dedicating separate space to ornamentals.
The fifth flower you must plant is borage,
And borage is an annual herb that self-seeds aggressively, which means you plant it once and it comes back forever on its own. And borage produces beautiful blue star-shaped flowers that are absolutely dripping with nectar. And bees work borage flowers constantly from morning until night. And borage blooms for months, from June all the way through September. And it is one of the best nectar plants you can grow. And beekeepers specifically plant borage near their hives because it produces light, delicious honey. And borage is also edible. The leaves taste like cucumber and the flowers are edible too. And it grows in poor soil and requires no fertilizer and no care. You just let it do its thing and the bees take care of the rest. So this is what early spring flowers do. They build the colony. This is category 2, summer flowers. The 6th flower you must plant is sunflower. And sunflowers are probably the most iconic bee flower. And for good reason, because a single sunflower head can have thousands of tiny flowers packed together, and each one of those tiny flowers produces nectar and pollen. And bees work sunflowers all day long. And sunflowers bloom in July and August when the main nectar flow is happening. And this is when bees are storing honey for winter. And sunflowers provide massive amounts of both nectar and pollen. And you can plant giant sunflowers that grow 10 feet tall, or you can plant smaller varieties that grow 4 or 5 feet. And either way, the bees will cover them. And after the bees are done, you can harvest the sunflower seeds for yourself or leave them for the birds in winter. The 7th flower you must plant is lavender. And lavender is a perennial shrub that blooms in June and July. And lavender produces some of the highest quality honey in the world, light and floral and delicious. And bees work lavender flowers constantly. And lavender thrives in hot, dry conditions, and it requires almost no water once established. And it grows in poor soil, and it is deer-resistant and drought-tolerant. And it lives for 10 or 15 years. You plant it once, and it just keeps producing. And lavender also has medicinal properties. You can dry the flowers for tea or sachets. And it is one of those plants that serves multiple purposes: beauty, bees, medicine, and fragrance. The 8th flower you must plant is oregano. And oregano is a perennial herb that most people grow for cooking. But if you let oregano flower in July and August, it produces masses of tiny pink and purple flowers that bees swarm. And oregano spreads aggressively and requires no care, no fertilizer, no water, and you can harvest oregano leaves all season and then let it flower at the end of summer. And oregano honey is dark and strong and flavorful. And if you let some of your thyme and sage flower too, bees love those as well. The 9th flower you must plant is calendula. And calendula is an annual flower that blooms from June until frost and produces bright orange and yellow flowers that bees work constantly. And calendula self-seeds aggressively, so you plant it once and it comes back every year on its own. And calendula is also medicinal. The flowers have anti-inflammatory properties. And calendula grows in any soil and requires no care. And it blooms continuously if you deadhead the spent flowers. And it also attracts beneficial insects like ladybugs and lacewings that eat aphids and other pests. And this is the difference between a garden that feeds you and a garden that just decorates your yard. The 10th flower you must plant is phacelia. And phacelia is an annual flower that is specifically grown by beekeepers as a cover crop because it produces insane amounts of nectar. And phacelia blooms in June and July, and the flowers are purple and fern-like, and bees cover phacelia so completely that you can hear the hum from 20 feet away. And phacelia is also a green manure crop, which means after it flowers, you can cut it down and dig it into the soil to add organic matter and nitrogen. And phacelia grows fast, from seed to flower in about 6 weeks. And it grows in any soil, and it requires no fertilizer. And you can succession plant it every few weeks to keep flowers coming all summer. And this is one of those plants that serves multiple purposes: bee forage, green manure, and soil improvement. The 11th flower you must plant is cosmos. And cosmos is an annual flower that blooms from July until frost and produces large daisy-like flowers in pink, white, and orange that bees work all day long. And cosmos is incredibly easy to grow. You just gather the seeds in spring and they germinate in a week. And Cosmos grows in poor soil. It actually prefers poor soil, and it requires no fertilizer and no water once established. And it blooms continuously until frost. And Cosmos self-seeds, so you plant it once and it comes back every year. Summer flowers are about storage.
This is Category 3, Fall Flowers. The 12th flower you must plant is asters, and asters are perennial flowers that bloom in September and October when almost everything else has stopped blooming. And asters are critical for bees because they provide late-season nectar and pollen that bees need to build up their winter stores. And without fall flowers like asters, bee colonies go into winter weak, and many of them do not survive. And asters come in purple, pink, and white, and they grow 2 to 4 feet tall, and they spread slowly and come back every year, and they require no care. And native asters are especially valuable because they co-evolved with native bees. And if you plant asters, you are not just feeding honeybees, you are feeding bumblebees and mason bees and all the other native pollinators that are critical for a healthy garden. The 13th flower you must plant is goldenrod, and goldenrod blooms in September and October, and it produces masses of bright yellow flowers that are absolutely loaded with pollen. And bees pack their pollen baskets full of goldenrod pollen to feed their larvae before winter. And goldenrod gets a bad reputation because people think it causes allergies, but that is ragweed, not goldenrod. Goldenrod pollen is too heavy to be airborne. And goldenrod is one of the most important fall nectar sources for bees, and it grows in any soil, full sun, or partial shade, and it spreads slowly and comes back every year, and it requires no care. And goldenrod honey is dark and strong, and it is the last major honey flow of the year. The 14th flower you must plant is sedum, and sedum is a perennial succulent that blooms in August and September. Sedum produces flat-topped clusters of tiny pink flowers, and bees and butterflies cover sedum flowers completely. And sedum is incredibly drought-tolerant. It grows in poor soil, it requires no water, no fertilizer, no care, and it comes back every year. And sedum is also evergreen. The foliage stays green all winter, and it provides structure and interest in the garden even when nothing else is growing. And sedum is one of those plants that you plant once and forget about, and it just keeps producing year after year. The 15th flower you must plant is buckwheat, and buckwheat is an annual cover crop that blooms in July and August. And buckwheat produces masses of tiny white flowers that are absolutely dripping with nectar. And buckwheat honey is dark and strong and has a distinctive flavor. And beekeepers specifically plant buckwheat for honey production. And buckwheat grows incredibly fast, from seed to flower in about 30 days. And it grows in any soil, even terrible soil, and it requires no fertilizer. And after it flowers, you can cut it down and use it as mulch or dig it into the soil as green manure. And buckwheat also suppresses weeds because it grows so densely. And this is another example of a plant that serves multiple purposes: bee forage, green manure, weed suppression, and honey production. Fall flowers are about survival. Now here is what ties all 15 flowers together. And this is not about 15 flowers. This is about one idea. Your garden should never be empty of blooms. And what that means is that from February when the crocuses bloom until October when the asters and goldenrod finish, there should always be something flowering in your garden. And when you plant these 15 flowers in sequence, you create a continuous nectar flow that supports bees all season long. And the bees in return pollinate your vegetables. And this is what Seymour calls the closed loop system, a system where every element supports every other element. And the result is that nothing is wasted, no energy is lost, and the garden becomes more productive every single year.
Here is the practical system. In fall, plant crocus and snowdrop bulbs around the edges of your garden beds. Plant them in drifts of 20 or 30 bulbs, and they will naturalize and spread. In early spring, let your fruit trees bloom. Do not spray them with anything that would harm bees. In May, let your chives flower and plant borage seeds directly in the soil. In June, plant sunflower seeds along the edges of your garden and let your lavender and oregano flower. In July, plant calendula, phacelia, cosmos, and buckwheat seeds. You can succession plant these every few weeks to keep flowers coming. In August, your sedum will bloom automatically. In September and October, your asters and goldenrod will bloom, and these will be the last flowers of the season. And if you remember nothing else, remember this: bees and gardens are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. And when you plant these 15 flowers, you are not just growing flowers, you are building a system that produces vegetables and honey and pollination and fertility. And this system does not require chemicals or fertilizers or purchased inputs. It runs on sunlight and nectar and the work of bees. And once you understand this, gardening stops being expensive because you are no longer buying honey. You are no longer hand-pollinating. you are no longer struggling with poor yields. You are harvesting 50 pounds of honey every year. Your tomatoes are setting fruit on every truss. Your squash is producing twice as much. Your cucumbers are growing full and straight. And all of this is happening because you planted 15 flowers. Here are the results you can expect. Research shows that gardens with adequate pollination produce 2 to 3 times more fruit than gardens without pollinators. And this applies to tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, melons, beans, and fruit trees. And if you keep bees in your garden, a single hive can produce 30 to 60 pounds of honey per year, depending on your climate and the availability of nectar. And if you calculate the value of that honey at $10 per pound, that is $300 to $600 worth of honey every single year. And on top of that, your vegetable yields have doubled or tripled, which means you are growing twice as much food in the same space. And this is not even counting the value of pollination services, which commercial farmers pay hundreds of dollars for. And you are getting all of this for free just by planting 15 flowers. And this is what Seymour understood, that a garden is not just a place where you grow vegetables. A garden is a living system, a system that includes vegetables and flowers and herbs and bees and birds and soil organisms. And when you design your garden as a system instead of a collection of individual plants, the garden becomes self-sustaining. It requires less work, less input, less money, and it produces more food, more honey, more fertility, and more abundance. And this is the difference between industrial agriculture, which is based on inputs and control, and ecological gardening, which is based on relationships and cooperation. And the 15 flowers I just showed you are the foundation of that system. They are the bridge between your vegetables and the bees. And when you plant them, you are not just planting flowers, you are building a relationship between your garden and the natural world. And that relationship will feed you for decades. Once you understand this, honey stops being something you buy, and pollination stops being something you worry about, because your garden is full of bees, and your bees are full of nectar, and your vegetables are full of fruit, and you are harvesting honey in August, and tomatoes in July, and squash in September. And all of this is happening because you planted 15 flowers. And this is the system that Seymour taught. This is the system that country gardeners used for thousands of years. And this is the system that will turn your garden from a place that requires constant inputs into a place that produces constant abundance. And the best part is that you plant most of these flowers once, and they come back every single year. The bulbs naturalize, the perennial spread, the annual self-seed, and every year the system gets stronger. The bee population grows, the pollination improves, the yields increase, and you are standing in your garden in August, and before you were standing there with a paintbrush in your hand, desperately hand-pollinating flowers one by one, and now you are standing there with a jar of honey in one hand and a basket of tomatoes in the other. And you are not buying anything, you are not spraying anything, you are not hand-pollinating anything, you are just harvesting, because you built a system that works with nature instead of against it, and that system is feeding you. And the difference was not effort, the difference was design.